some more advanced pieces of negotiating with sellers. So, first thing, let's go through pricing. So when we're actually pricing, my PDF's on there. We'll be all right. So, okay, some advanced things to do with pricing. Now, when we're talking to sellers, obviously we're going to show up to their house, do the listing consultation with a CMA in hand, right? So CMA, we're going to have actives, under contracts, and solds that we're going to go through with the seller. And I'm going to show you an example of that once my computer's back up. You really want to have as many actives as possible because actives really show what the competition is doing. So if you sit down with your seller and you look at, okay, here's what all the details are that your house has. It has X amount of bedrooms, bathrooms, square footage, garage, acreage, all that stuff. As you go through that with them, you want to give them a really good idea of what their house has, because they may not know. Honestly, most people probably wouldn't know exactly what their square footage is, their acreage is, all that stuff.
What PDF are you looking for? Is it something?
No, it was just like a cloud CMA that I had made in the past.
Okay.
It wasn't a fancy one or anything. It was just normal cloud CMA. So anyways, as you kind of go through the CMA with them, it's really important that first you show them what their house has. So what does their house offer? What are all the different things? Because they know that it looks pretty. They think it's probably nicer than all the other houses on the street, right? All of our sellers do. But what are the hard numbers on what they've got? So that's probably the first thing you want to go through. The next thing you're going to go through is you're going to show them the solds. So what that looks like is you're basically going to pull up all the sold properties and you're going to want to roll through them with them. So you're going to try to do something called bracketing. Who knows what bracketing is? Anyone? Bracketing? Jake, what's bracketing?
It is when we pick it between brackets.
Yes, yes, very, very helpful. So
No. Okay, thank you.
So bracketing is basically you want to find a house, you want to find at least one house that's a little better than the house you're looking at. Let's say the house that we're trying to price is the subject property, right? So you want to find a house that's similar, that's a little bit better than the one you're trying to sell. You want to find something that's a little worse than the one you're trying to sell. It'd be great if you can find one that's very similar to the one you're trying to sell, but that's going to give you a nice little range. So we know, okay, it's probably not going to be higher than this one. It's probably not going to be lower than this one. So that just gives you that's how we want to be able to find the info. Sometimes we have really good stuff like that. I was just doing one, what was that for? Oh, for one of my clients over here in Sandy. And they were like, they're from out of state, so they don't necessarily know like exactly what pricing looks like here. So they just sent me one that was like $900,000. It was beautiful, but it was like your average kind of run-of-the-mill Rambler in Sandy. It was on like 17th East, so it was pretty far east, but they were like, wow, this seems like unbelievably low priced, like whatever. And when I pulled it up, so one, when you're talking to your clients, never say, oh no, that's way overpriced or that's way underpriced, unless you really know. You want to go to the data. But when I looked at the data, every house that had sold in that neighborhood was like 650, 700, 750. The one we're looking at is 900. And don't get me wrong, it was like a pro level, like the most high-end remodel you can imagine. But what we were lacking was like that top bracket to kind of keep us, if there's this really nice one that had sold at 850 or 900, we would say, okay, that kind of validates it. But because we didn't have that top end, we couldn't quite get there. If that makes sense. So it's much easier if you can have one that kind of keeps you below a certain amount and one that keeps you above a certain amount. So when you're doing pricing, that's just a good practice. And I am going to pull this up really quick because it looks like my computer is going to play nice now. So hang on 1 second and I'm going to pull this up.
Get the Wi-Fi.
They all have to be within the same neighborhood, right?
Do they all have to be in the same neighborhood? So you really want them to be within a half mile and you want them up to 1 mile. In like, let's say in Salt Lake County, you're half mile to 1 mile out usually. If it's a super unique property, you might go out just a little bit further, but not a lot. And then if you're in like Tooele or Heber or you're probably gonna have to go out even further than that. So then we're looking at 3 or 5 miles out, just because their houses are so spaced out that there's not that many comps, within that small range. So it does depend a little bit. And I should mention that comps make a difference. It really does depend where they're at. We bought, my in-laws bought a house in Moab, and they were like, oh, we love the price. It's so great. And I was like, honestly, I think it's overpriced. I don't see any other split entries that have sold at that price. Not one, and this one wasn't particularly nice. So we kind of went through it and they're like, well, we want it. Let's just do it. If the appraiser has a problem, then we'll deal with it. Okay, great. The appraisal came back. The appraiser was using Ramblers to compare this split entry. They were using Ramblers, they were using 2 stories, they were using like any house that had sold in Moab was now a comp for this house. That type of thing would never happen in Salt Lake. Like, that's just not how it works. So it's just very interesting. So that is one thing. You have to keep a little bit of like curiosity of what other markets are like, and don't. So even once you get really good at CMAs, you might think, oh, I know all this stuff, I've got it all taken care of. But every area is a little bit different. Okay, I'm gonna pull up this PDF real quick. Yeah, just give me 1 second. I'm just gonna switch this and then we'll be done with like the tech stuff. But I just want to be able to share this with you. So this is gonna be some of the pricing conversations that you're gonna have with your seller. So obviously, you show them what their house has, you show them what all the solds have. You're gonna try to do that bracketing, get one that's a little higher, one that's a little lower, preferably a couple of each.
You can, that way you can see his screen.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll probably be better because I'm about to share.
Kind of do a hybrid.
recording in progress.
It's tricky. But yeah, that whole hybrid.
Thank you.
You have the.
Okay,
Um,
I'm back.
Yeah.
All right, so oh, will you make me a host?
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Okay, so you do want to do the bracketing. That's probably the first part. Now that's for sold. So when you roll through solds with them, you do have to check your pace. That's probably the biggest thing that we run into, is you have to make sure that you're mirroring and matching your seller. So as you roll through the numbers, sometimes you're going to go through them and you're going to say, okay, we've got, this house, it's got this many bedrooms, this many bathrooms, this many square feet. It's sold for this price on this day. You can really go through all the details with some of your clients, but some of them are not going to be that patient. And if you go through that many details with them, they're going to get super bored and they're going to be over it. So you have to move pretty quick. A lot of the times, I would say most clients, if you think of the disc, how there's all these different personality types, right? Most clients are not going to be your C clients that are super detail driven. A lot of them are just going to be a little more like quick paced. They don't want necessarily all of the details. So, you do have to move pretty quick. Now, the solds are going to be the best indication of price because they actually sold. So they listed for a certain price. A buyer agreed to pay that price. They actually closed. They appraised. Everything was good, right? So sold is going to be the best indicator of value there. The pendings, those are going to be kind of the next best because they're actually going to be selling now. Like, they're a little more current. The solds are in the past. The pendings are like in the process right now in today's market. They're actually selling. So the pendings are really good. What's the only problem with pendings when we're talking price? Can you think of like what the problem would be with using a pending as a comp?
Well, we don't know what it's actually sold for.
Exactly. We don't know the sold
We know
price.
what it listed for, brought an offer in, which is really good information, but we don't necessarily know what the price is.
Totally. Yep. So yes, now I am.
There you go.
So, okay. So, going through the pending, I just wanted to show you more than anything. I wanted to show you a little kind of an idea of what the cloud CMA looks like. So in the CMA class, you learn how to run a cloud CMA. Basically, I wanted to give you a quick idea of what it looked like. So as we look at the house that they've got, we want to compare it to these ones. So these are all the houses that we used as comps. This is really old, or like a couple of years old, maybe. But basically, I wanted to show you what it looks like. So these are sold, these are pendings, these are backups, and these are active. Do you guys know the difference between pendings and backups?
Yep, they're still accepting offers, right?
Yep, backups could, they're still kind of letting people through their house and they still could accept an offer for sure. So, there's kind of some different things with backups. So, okay, if you're the cool thing about backups and under contracts is they actually contractually are the same. A backup and an under contract, they both got a buyer. They officially went under contract. That really is their status. So what's the difference between under contract and backup? Backups typically will still allow showings. So they're still going to let you bring your clients through. You can take a look. You'll probably notice that backups are usually vacant houses because the seller doesn't care if you come through a few times. They don't have to get their kids and their dogs and everything out of the house because it's vacant. Whereas under contracts usually are going to be occupied homes where they don't want additional people coming through because their family is just living their life in there. While it's pending, they don't want to take additional showings. Does that make sense? So those are kind of the differences there. Now, since we're talking sellers today and strategy with pricing, and just the process of selling, I do think, like personally, I think that if you go into, well, backup status, the problem with backup status, even though it lets people still come see the house, it also allows it to accrue days on market. So let's say that we listed a house last Wednesday. Well, let's say we listed a house last Monday. As of today, it would have 7 days on market, right? So we've got 7 days on market. Let's say we go under contract tonight. If it's under contract, the 7 days stop counting. So we just have 7 days on market. While we're under contract, we're going through the process. If we switch to backup status, then it's going to continue to count because that house was still available to the public for all those days. So it's going to start adding days, which that's only a problem. Let's say that that contract cancels and we have to come back on the market. Now we're going to come back on the market, but instead of having 7 days, we might have accrued all the way up to say 28 days. So when we hit the market again, it's going to look like we've been on for 4 weeks. We really haven't. We've been under contract most of that time. So that's kind of the disadvantage of backup. Does that make sense? Okay.
But if they already have an offer, why are they accepting other offers?
Good question. So they're accepting other offers in backup status. What that means is if the first contract fails, then they'll have that backup contract to lean on. So they're just kind of hedging their bets and kind of lining buyers up back to back so that what it really does for the seller is it usually means that the first buyer is actually going to perform. It usually doesn't get passed to the next buyer, but what it means is that that first initial buyer knows, hey, if I don't perform, if I ask for too many repairs, if I'm unreasonable, then they're going to, I'm going to leave and they're just going to go to the next buyer, you know? So whereas if you don't have a backup buyer, you're really trying to make it work with your current one. But when you're dealing with repairs, if you've got a backup buyer in hand, you might just say, hey, if you guys don't want it, we'll just go to the next buyer. Like we've got someone else who loves the house. We're going to move forward with that. Now, of course, that has some risks as well for the seller, right? Because you may go back to that next seller or the next buyer, they may want the same thing, right? So that's none of these things are without their risks. But just to give you a little idea of what those differences are. So in Cloud CMA, they use the word sold, pending, backup, and active. So anyways, this is just a quick rundown of what it looks like. So this is what you'd be going through with your seller. You'd be saying, hey, there's this other house that sold. It's got 4 beds, 4 baths, sold for $715 and it sold on August 31st. And then you go to the next one. But really you have to watch you really have to watch your speed here because you can lose a lot of sellers in that conversation. So if you're looking at pendings, you can even pull them up on the MLS, but look at some of these pendings and basically if you pull them up on the MLS, let's say like this Tilton Drive one, this one was listed at this one shows a price of $645. That does not mean it's under contract for $645. It just means that it was listed at $645 when it went under contract. So what you want to do is look at the days on market. So even pull up the MLS and find the days on market and say, okay, if it was only 5 days on market, it's probably at or above list price, right? Whereas if it's been on the market for 120 days, it's probably coming below that mark, right? So the pendings, we don't know what they sold for, like Terry said, but we can get a little bit of an idea based on how quickly they moved.
So they, we don't know how much they were sold.
They're under contract to be sold. So they haven't officially sold, they're pending. So they have a buyer that's under contract on it, but it's not sold yet.
Isn't it like under contract? It's
Yeah.
different.
Yeah. So like sold would be these top ones that are sold. They're like Bartlett Drive. It sold on 8/31, meaning it closed, funded, done. Like that's a done deal. Whereas these pending and backup ones, those are still under contract. So that's kind of the difference. Sold, under contract. Now the active ones, and normally you'd want a lot more actives than I had on this one. I only had one active. But these are good because that's your competition. So if you're pricing a house and if you're pricing a house, you need to show more value than the other ones that are available. So if someone looks at this, like let's say that our house matched this one exactly. So this one on Bartlett Drive, 3-bed, 3-bath, built in 2020, 3,600 square feet, lot size 4791, which this is in square feet. That's how Cloud CMA does it. So let's say our house was that exact same one, and this one is listed at 639. Let's say it's been on for 30 days. What do you think we need to do for our listing to make sure that it sells quickly? Any ideas? We want to be listed at, above, or below what this active one for 639 is. If ours is basically the exact same. Any thoughts? Any Zoomers have thoughts?
At or above?
Good. I like it. I like it. Yeah, above. Above is always better, right? So what I was gonna say is you want to be more aggressively a price than the one that's active. So if this one is, let's say we have one that's 3 beds, 3 baths, 3,600 square feet. The competition is at 639. We need to be showing better value than that. So we might want to be at 630. We might want to be 625. I probably confused you more than anything, but because I know you're on the same page. What's that?
What do you say?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if we list at the same price, then we're 50-50. So if someone sees ours and sees theirs, whichever one they like better, it's probably the one they're going to run with, right? But if we're the one that's 10,000 below, they're going to take ours for sure, right? And condition does have to do with it. If there's smells or weird colors or whatever, like, that certainly could affect the value of it as well. So the other cool thing is when you're listing a house, it's cool because you can go see the other actives. Sometimes I'll even take my seller. It's a little risky because they might know that owner. So you have to be a little bit careful, but they might know the seller of that house, but at least myself, I'll go walk through the active homes and see. Because when you go through, you might see things that you couldn't see in the picture. Like, let's say I walked through this house, but the carpet smelled horrible. Like it had like pet odors and whatnot. Then when I come back to my seller, I can say, hey, I went and toured your neighbors. I didn't want it to be awkward for you, but I toured your neighbor's house. It is the same floor plan. It's the same space and everything as yours, but it smells horrible. If we're priced the same as that one, we're going to be gone quick because they walk through both of them. They're going to choose yours just like that, So you're really just comparing and contrasting that way. Does that make sense? So just Cloud CMA is nice because it does give you pictures of each of the comps, which makes it very convenient as you go through with your sellers. And what I want to show you, of course, the one I chose didn't have exactly what I wanted. Hang on, if I pull another one, I'm positive it will. Because I pretty much always set them up the same way. So these are some of the topics that we go through with sellers as far as selling. So one thing, when I said, let's price it a little more aggressively than the other one, why do you think I'm saying that we should price it more aggressively than the other one? Because I said we want to sell it faster, right? What are your thoughts on selling a home fast? Like, what are your preconceived notions about selling a home fast? Good, bad, indifferent? Do you think it's good for it to sit on the market, or do you think it's better for it to sell quickly? Like, what are your thoughts? Yeah.
If you don't mind sitting on it. But if you wanna sell it quick, then price it a little bit lower and maybe people will
Totally.
look to it more.
Love it. Yep. If you want to get it sold fast, you got to price it aggressively, right? And the other thing, almost kind of the flip side of that, this is your conversation you're going to have with your sellers. Because have any of you, like in your listing consultations, any of you run into where they say, oh, hey, I'm not in a big rush? I feel like every one of my
They all
sellers
say
says
that.
that. I'm not in
Regardless
a
if
big
they are or
rush.
not, they all say them.
Right. So I have the best script ever for that, because what they're saying is they're okay with it sitting on the market longer. And so this is the script, and then we can kind of dissect it. But to me, the script is this: hey, I get it. And that would make perfect sense if the longer it stayed on market, the more money you got for it. But what do we know about pricing is that that's not the case. The longer it sits on the market, the more it becomes a stigmatized property. The more people wonder, geez, what's wrong with that? Why has it been on the market so long? And guess which direction the price goes further down, right? So that's a really effective script to be talking to them, because when they say, oh, we are not in a big rush, I'll even say, hey, well, maybe we hold off on bringing it to the market until you're ready to get it sold, because the worst thing for us to do is to put it on the market and have it sit for a long time. And does that make sense to you guys? Do you think that would make sense to a seller? They're like, oh yeah. So a lot of times I just say, hey, if you're not ready to get it sold, let's hold off, because we don't want to be sitting on the market for a long time, because that price is just going to come down and down.
Mhm.
Say something?
Please.
So, I just feel like the more days it's on the market, the more then people are gonna start to wonder, well, what's wrong with that house that it has to sold,
Totally.
you know?
Totally.
Mhm.
They start to recognize it and it looks like a problem, right?
Instead
Totally.
of like people wanting to move in there, they'll be like, why are other people moving in there?
Yep. Totally. Yep, I totally agree. So that's a really good conversation for us to be having with our sellers as we are going through that. You really need to know the main objection handlers, and price certainly is going to be an objection that you're going to run into. So I'm just going to check one other to see if I can get my charts that I like to show my sellers. This just makes a lot of sense when you go through this, because of course, there we go. They always think that their house is going to be worth a little bit more than it is, right? And that's pretty common. It's pretty common that they'll know that. So, or that they'll think that. Okay, a couple things with pricing. So intelligent pricing and timing. I don't know if you guys have seen this graphic before, but basically this graphic is showing you that if you price at exactly what the market value is, so say you run all the comps, it says that house is worth X amount, you're going to be right here where maybe 60% of the buyers are going to be looking at your property. Now, if you overprice it, say you're 10 or 15% higher than what the market's going to bear, that buyer pool is going to be stripped down to either 30 or 10%. So all the buyers that are looking in that neighborhood, you're going to lose a lot of them if you're overpriced. If you're underpriced, so let's say you're 10% underpriced, you're going to have 75% of the neighborhood is going to be able to be looking at that house. If you're way underpriced, like say 15% under, you're going to have 90% of those buyers that are looking in the neighborhood checking out that house. So it really is talking about how can we maximize the buyer pool to make sure as many people see it as possible. So pricing aggressively can get you the most money possible for sure. And this also illustrates the same thing. So as we're talking to your sellers and they say, hey, I'm really not in too big of a rush, or I don't really care to get that money soon. You can kind of go through here and might say, hey, maybe we hold off on taking this to market, because in the first 2 weeks, you're going to get the absolute most showings during your whole listing period. So it's important that we look that your house looks amazing, that your pricing is perfect, because we really do need to hit this sweet spot. We really want to get it under contract within 3 or 4 weeks, even in a market that's slowed down a little bit. The average days on market is probably about 60 days in Salt Lake County right now. Haven't checked it way recently, but a couple weeks ago it was at 60. So it's probably somewhere in there. But we really want to be sold within 3-4 weeks, is when we're going to get the peak money out of it for the seller, for exactly the reason you're talking about. It's gonna start to look bad. People are gonna wonder why it hasn't sold yet. So 57 days. So it's coming down probably a little
Dang it,
bit.
Nick, you
Well,
were,
yeah.
you were off.
Yeah, I've got to do my homework. Sorry. So, oh, my camera's not on? Oh my gosh. Oh, I mean, not that you guys are missing out or anything, but geez. Yeah, you're not missing anything, but still, that sounds kind of boring just to listen to someone monotone talk. Okay, so when it comes to pricing, those are a few of the conversations you're gonna have. Does anyone have comments or questions about like maybe some objections you might think you might hear and you want to know how to deal with them the best, or any comments on pricing?
Well, I've seen, that some agents, price it lower, because they wanna get like a lot of offers.
Totally.
And then, like, for example, I was looking for a house for this buyer and a house came up or it came in the market and it was like 425-ish or something like that. And then
Yeah.
around the neighborhood, it was like 450. So, and then the seller got a lot of offers. So that's something weird, right?
Totally.
Or is that something that they do so they can get like more offers?
Yeah, they're kind of following this script here, like this, where they're coming in just a little bit low. Now it's possible they just didn't understand the price, but I feel for the most part, I would say they do, and they are doing a good job of being aggressive. Because of course the seller wants to list high. So when they actually have listed a little low, you're like, oh, they've got a good agent who understands the market because their agent did a good job convincing them to be aggressive, to be able to get as much interest as possible. So it really does depend on the market. I mean, you don't want to have it listed lower than your sellers are willing to get. That's not going to work. But totally, especially in this market, you see a pretty big polarizing difference between the houses that are sitting on the market for 6 months and expiring. And then there's the houses that stay on for 3 days and go under contract. There's a big, like, there's not a lot of in between. Usually they're sitting for a long time or they're off the market within just a few days. So pricing aggressively can get multiple offers. It can get a lot of interest in it. Do you have anything to add to that?
No, I mean, I think the way you answered it is perfect, her question. The only thing I was gonna add, to this is I feel like the objections, the sellers don't know this at all. So most of the time you get kind of what you were saying where they're like, oh, I'm not in a hurry, or they're gonna say, oh, I just want to wait and see. So I was just gonna say, and he'll probably get to it with like the negotiation, but it comes back to knowing their motivation, knowing like, do they really have to sell? Because even if they're like, oh, I have to buy this new house or whatever, that doesn't feel like an urgent thing to them, although it really could be. So like, we're just gonna wait and see. So then you have to dig really deep for motivation, because I think that's gonna be the second objection, is that you'll get, oh, we just want to wait and see, and then you'll try to explain it to them, and then they're just gonna, kind of continue with that. So you have to be really good. I love this, these graphs for that reason.
Totally. Yep. And these graphs, these are what come automatically pretty much at the bottom of a cloud CMA report. So if you run a cloud CMA, you will see these at the bottom. You can remove them. And there's a bunch more that you can see. I stripped them down to just a few that I think get a good point across. But yeah, these are like free, accessible, super easy. So, okay, so we all know it's important to price correctly. Of course, we're not trying to give any properties away, but it is in the seller's best interest to sell it quickly because they're going to get the most money for it. So, okay, so what we want to talk about now is negotiating from a seller's perspective. I feel like a lot of the times we were talking about how we talk about from a buyer's perspective, how do we write an offer? How do we negotiate? But we want to dig in a little bit deeper on more of the advanced negotiations for sellers specifically. So a few different things. So let's say that you're the seller, you're representing the seller, and you price it aggressively, which you guys probably already know this, but just a quick recap. A lot of the times what we would recommend is that you get pictures taken on a Monday or a Tuesday. We get those pictures back and actually get it listed officially on Wednesday. And then we have our big open house on Saturday. That's considered like the grand open house strategy. So pictures Monday or Tuesday, list on the MLS on Wednesday, grand open house on Saturday. And then we don't hold showings. A lot of the times we don't hold showings Thursday or Friday. What we're trying to do is build the anticipation for that big grand open house. So it's a super effective way. What you want is that when someone's looking at the house, it's preferable that someone else is also there. Someone else's car is also in the driveway and they're walking around the house so that that pulls out their most competitive side. Right. So we're trying to get people to kind of compete with each other and know that, hey, if I don't buy it today, it may not be available tomorrow because I know that other couple was looking at it earlier. So that's kind of how we want to set up the timeline to be as effective as possible. A couple of quick things. So let's say now we did our job, we did all of that, we get some offers, and it's maybe that following Monday, and we're like, okay, what are we going to do? First of all, as you get offers, whereas people are talking about sending you offers, say, hey, we'd love to see it. I can't wait to go through it with my seller. A lot of times they'll say, hey, if I send you an offer for this, this, and this, will you accept it? I'll totally present it to my seller, like get it over to me ASAP and we'll go through it. So you do want to, you can't commit to anything on behalf of your sellers, but you do want to actively say, hey, send it over. I'll be happy to go through it with my clients. We'll figure it out. One of the things that's really important to do is to make sure that their financing is good. So if as you're sorting through those contracts, hopefully you have multiple of them because that's really fun because you get to choose the very best one for your seller, right? But as you're going through, there's a few things you want to look at. One of them is going to be pre-approval. So, pre-approvals are super important and they can also hold different weight depending on where you get them. So some lenders pass pre-approvals out like candy, which if you're the buyer's agent, you might like because you're like, hey, I need a pre-approval so I can send in this offer and get moving. But if you're the seller's agent, you don't want to be going under contract with a buyer who's not fully pre-approved, right? And so there's kind of just to give you some of the verbiage. To give you some of the verbiage so you can be a little more familiar with it, usually pre-qualification means they haven't provided all of their documentation, their income maybe hasn't all been provided. Pre-qual is usually based on their stated information, whereas a pre-approval is typically going to mean they reviewed their income, they reviewed their assets, they've seen their taxes, all of the good stuff. So that's really what you want. But when you get a pre-approval, you can't just assume that all that stuff has happened. You have to, you really want to talk to the lender and say, hey, I'm the listing agent on a certain property. You're working with this client, whoever, and I just want to see what potential issues you see. How do you feel about them? Where are they at? Do you have all their documentation? These are all questions that are perfectly fine for you to ask. Okay, it's a little contentious because some people say, oh, you shouldn't be calling and asking about my clients' financials, but you totally can. Now, what the loan officer tells you is maybe a different story because if the loan officer gives you all their financial information, should they really do that? I would say probably not, but that's not really your job. Your job is to represent your seller to make sure you get them the strongest offer possible. So you can ask. If they tell you too much, then that's kind of on them. But you can definitely ask, and I think you should ask. Sometimes when I call, I don't know if you get this. A lot of times when I call, they'll say, oh, you're with Keller Williams, huh? So Keller Williams has a little bit of a reputation for calling and confirming those pre-approvals, which I think is a pretty good thing.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think that's a pretty good
Like
reputation to
negotiating
have.
on the best interest of your client. Weird.
So strange. So call the lender, see what their situation is, just ask, hey, tell me a little bit about that buyer, or tell me, how are you feeling about it? And then I would ask specific questions like, what possible hurdles do you anticipate on this one? A lot of times they'll tell you. A lot of times they'll say, well, I don't know, they just changed jobs, so I've got to re-verify income and all that stuff. That's good information for you to have. Like I said, not maybe good information for them to tell you, but here we are. So pre-approval is really important. If they're cash buyers, it's really important to check their proof of funds. You can do that by having them send just a bank statement of sorts. You can call their bank and confirm that those funds are there. Like basically I think you could walk in person and just say, hey, I just want to confirm this proof of funds. I've never done it, to be honest, but I've usually called, but just call and confirm that, hey, this is legitimate. this person actually has this money, because obviously it would be pretty easy to doctor a bank statement these days, right? With AI and whatnot, we could do
Yeah.
that pretty quick. So, okay, the other things we want to look out for are the time frames. So you guys know section 24, section 24 of the normal rep C has all your time frames on there. So as a seller, what do those time frames do? Those time frames are typically to protect the buyer, right? You've got seller disclosure, due diligence, finance, and appraisal. Those are the big three to protect, really the big two, due diligence and finance and appraisal. But those are the big ones that are protecting the buyer. So because whatever those dates are, those are basically the dates by which the buyer can cancel for almost any reason or no reason at all. They have a lot of latitude on it. If the buyer wants to cancel before those dates, they can get all their earnest money back typically, the way we would normally write it. So as you're dealing with, as you're representing your seller, it's important to look at those. It's important to keep an eye on it. And most importantly, I think it's important to disclose and make sure that they understand what those dates are. Because they might look at the closing date. Let's say the closing date is set up for April 5th, but their contingencies, like their finance and appraisal, is off on March 21st. Well, that's not really too long. So it's not like it's a problem. It's only a problem if your seller thinks they're closing April 5th. They've got all their stuff packed up, shipped off to Kansas City or wherever it's going to be. And then they realize that on March 21st, you guys get an email that says the buyer's canceling and taking their earnest money. And now your seller has nothing. They don't have any money. They don't have any earnest money on it. They've got all their stuff already shipped out. Like, it's a big deal. So it's just important that they understand what the dates mean. Like, hey, it's going to get a little more serious once we hit this date. That's when their earnest money is going to become non-refundable. If you explain that stuff up front, which I would recommend reading the Rep C, it's super, it's pretty clear. I'm not saying there's not a little bit of legalese on it, but it's really supposed to be understandable by anyone. You do not need a law degree to understand a Rep C. That's the whole point of it. So I would read through it, but you want to know, okay, at which points are we going to become non-refundable on this earnest money, so that you can advise your client. So they're going to be real surprised, and not in a good way, if the buyer backs out and they didn't know that was an option. So that's a big thing. Settlement, of course, we know that settlement deadline is important because that's when we're actually set to close. But usually that one's not super easy to confuse. And then the last one that we wanted to talk about is section 25. So section 25, I probably could even pull it up. Maybe it'll make it easier for you to, might make it easier for you to follow along. I'm just going to grab some real random one here. Maybe I'm not, I don't know. Here, I'll pull one up right here real quick. Going to forms library, real estate purchase contract. Just want to show you real quick. So section 25 is down here. It's still sharing. Okay, yeah. Okay, so section 24 is right here.
Question.
I just have a question. This might be a dumb question, but I just want to know.
Yeah.
Do you guys have the Rep C available also in Spanish? Or is it
No.
just English?
No,
Oh, okay.
so it has to be in English.
Mhm.
But you can help your clients. You can help your clients sign it in English, you know?
Okay.
That's one of those weird things. And honestly, we're getting more and more marketing materials in Spanish, but there isn't even a lot of that widely available in Spanish. So it's a little weird. We're working on it. But yeah, from the state's perspective, it has to be in English.
Is it like a thing? If it's in Spanish, then it has to be like in another language for like somebody that speaks like Russian.
It could be for
That would
sure.
make perfect sense.
Yeah, for sure.
It could be that.
So I think they want to make sure both parties understand it. Well, yeah, they want to make sure both parties understand it. And if they don't, then they want to make sure they have the right interpreter services or whatnot. But they just don't ever want it to be, oh, I didn't understand that. You know, I didn't understand it because it wasn't in my native language or whatever. So, so yeah, so section 24, that's where those those dates are for, seller disclosure, due diligence, finance appraisal to protect the buyer. The settlement deadline, of course, is just the settlement deadline. That's when we're actually going to sign, or we're going to sign by that date. Section 25 is important because as you're representing sellers, you're going to get bullied. You'll get bullied as buyer's agent too, in a lot of different ways. But people will, let's say that we listed the house on Wednesday. We maybe showed it on Thursday or Friday. We've got our big open house scheduled for Saturday. There's going to be some buyer's agents that coast in and they send you an offer on Wednesday or Thursday or Friday. And they're just like, hey, you need to sign it right now. We don't want you to do the open house. Just go ahead and agree to it. We came in at full list price. What more could you want from us? And we need you to sign it now before the open house. They will bully you like that. That's a real thing. They really will do that. It's part of the reason that a lot of the times we don't allow showings on Thursday or Friday because we don't want anyone in the house submitting offers, trying to hold us like hostage that way. And so it's just important to know, just because this section 25 is basically their acceptance time. So if they say, hey, here's this offer, and maybe it's a great offer, maybe it's not, but they send it and they say, okay, it has to be accepted by Friday at 5 p.m. What that basically means is at Friday at 5 p.m., this one really will expire. Like the offer they sent you will expire. So they're just like, hey, if you want it to expire and not have this deal anymore, that's fine. Just have your open house. It's going to be great. Hope you get a great offer from it, So they'll kind of bully you. So it's just important to know what you're going to do. Have the conversation with your seller. Hey, normally we recommend waiting until Monday to go under contract. Now, what are the dangers of that? What are the different possibilities? Because if you wait till Monday, there's a chance that this guy who submitted one on Friday is not going to want to go under contract on Monday, right? They could say, hey, you didn't accept it on Friday, so we're out.
Or they go find another house on Saturday.
Yep.
Waiting.
So those are real risks. What I always tell my seller is, hey, if they wrote this deal on Thursday and because we didn't sign it by Friday, they don't want to be under contract on it by Monday. It's like, were they really that serious to begin with? Were they going to go under contract with us and then they were going to bail after the first inspection? It's pretty likely, honestly, if they're trying to bully us. Most people who want the house on Friday still want the house on Monday, right? If they're motivated, if they like it, it's the right fit for their family. If they want it on Friday, they're still going to want it on Monday. So these are just conversations you have to be prepared for. But a lot of agents think that this section 25, this offering time for acceptance, they think, oh, if I put 5 o'clock tomorrow, that means that the seller agent has to respond to me by that deadline, or else they're going to go to real estate jail, right? Or they're going to get a big spanking from the board. So that's how they treat it. Like it's this whole thing. But remember, you don't represent them, you represent your client. And this is their timeline. They choose that. That doesn't mean that we have to respond in that time. So of
And
course,
there's reasons for that too. And I don't want to get into like a contract class right now, but there are other reasons not to rush with a seller. So like, do we know how much they owe on the property? Do we know if there's any liens on the property? So if you get kind of bullied into rushing it to meet this deadline and throwing your seller under contract, without being 100% prepared, then you could get into some trouble too. So this, to me, I always feel like they are trying to push us around. So when we represent the seller, like it's okay to go past this. You can extend it, and sometimes it's safer to let this expire to know that you're prepared to move forward.
totally.
The time, the date. So you have to send, what is it called? Like another document that says.
You don't have to do anything. So
Oh.
that's kind of the point of what he's saying is we don't have to do anything with this deadline. And so when you represent the seller, a lot of the buyer's agents are going to make you feel like you have to do something.
Respond.
Yeah, and you don't necessarily have to. It's obviously a good practice to be like, thank you, I've received your offer. Thank you. We're going to be doing our open house tomorrow, or letting people know, hey, we're going to respond to you on Monday. We are going to miss this deadline, but we will get back to you, that sort of thing. It's good to let them know I'm going to present it to my seller, because we do have to present contracts to the seller, but we don't have to do anything with this.
We don't even
date.
have to write down an addendum.
Mm-mm. Nope,
Or
not,
extended thing.
you don't have to. No, you can. You definitely could, but you don't have to. Because a lot of times when you represent the seller, the buyer's agent is using this deadline to make you feel that pressure of having to do something. That's why we kind of make a big deal about it when it comes to the seller side. You don't have to do anything. As an example, like this last weekend, the same thing happened to me where they wanted a response by, I think they wanted it Saturday at 5. And they were asking for something for my seller to pay for. And my seller's like, I may or may not pay for this, but I'm not gonna move forward without getting an invoice from, it basically was dirt. Without receiving an invoice from the dirt company. So we had to wait until today, like we just had to. Because the dirt ended up being $100,000. So if he would have said yes, I think it'll just be like 20 grand. I can totally agree to this. And then he found out it was 100 grand. And we would have signed this at 5 o'clock on Saturday, then he would have been really upside down and trying to figure out how can I cancel this contract, which is really hard for a seller to do. Or how do I come up with this extra $80,000 I wasn't expecting to pay for? So when I'm representing a seller, I don't want to rush them. I really want to make sure they know exactly what they're getting into, what the potential is, what they could get into, which could be something better.
And say, for example, you do accept the offer on Monday, right? So
Mhm.
it was Friday, you ignored it or whatever.
Yeah.
And you accepted it on Monday.
Yeah.
You still need to write an addendum.
Then you would
That
need to
deadline.
extend it. Yes. Yes, for sure. And so usually what happens because we're waiting or not always, but we're waiting for something, we were maybe going to counter them anyway.
Okay,
So,
that's what I
yes.
was.
So included in the counter offer, I would put the extension for response time. I would extend the response time at that point and include it with the counter offer. Yeah.
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 Yeah, the mindset is really important because it's just really common that people get bullied, especially if you're a newer agent and they'll know it. Like they'll go look up when did you get licensed? How many deals have you closed? Like people are weird like that. So they'll know. And so I'll show you. I'll show you one day, but so people will bully you though. So you just have to remember, it's not that you think of everyone as bad. Like when you're going into a negotiation with someone, you don't think, oh, that agent's bad. Like we're on opposite sides and we're gonna get them. But you do have to remember, like they represent someone entirely different than you. So when they say, oh, it's no problem, we do this all the time, that's not a thing. Like that's not like, just don't even think about that. Just be like, okay, well, that's great for you. I'm going to talk to one of my coaches or I'm going to talk to my broker and I'm going to get it worked out and I'll get back to you. So just don't be bullied by that. We see it all the time, like all the time.
I've been doing this for. Oh,
Yeah,
yes.
if they tell you how long they've been doing it. So one of our brokers has the funniest thing. So when someone calls and says, oh my gosh, like you're doing this, like they're like, no, that's not how you do it. I've been doing it this way for 30 years. He'll say, oh my gosh, you've been doing it wrong for 30 years. I love it. So yes, you just have to, whatever they say, just don't give in, talk to your people, make sure you're taken care of. Because one thing that Terry was kind of hitting on that I think sometimes goes unnoticed is that when a buyer signs a contract, they have outs. They've got due diligence, they've got finance and appraisal. They're really protected. It's obvious that this contract is built to protect a buyer. And the seller, when the seller signs their name and goes under contract, they are under contract. Like the amount of times that they would have a right to be able to cancel the contract is so slim. Like almost none of our sellers would qualify for it. So if they agree to it, they're in it. So to the buyer, it's no big deal. Like, come on, let's just go ahead. Let's just get it under contract. It's going to be great. To the seller, it's not the same. So
If their payoff is wrong, if the repair that they agreed to is wrong, I mean, there's just so many things that could go wrong for a seller. So that's why I'm like, nope, we're putting the brakes on. We're not rushing this
yeah.
until we know for sure.
I think the context is important because when we talk about it, sometimes it's like, oh, you don't have to respond within 24 hours. What we're saying is not, oh, go be negligent. Don't pay attention to anything. Leave your seller. It's not you that has all this latitude to just do whatever. Like I'm on vacation, so I'm probably not going to respond till this. You have to set things up to make, I mean, you got to represent your client well, but if your client says, hey, I'm not comfortable, like Terry's client did, I'm not comfortable signing that today because I don't have all the info that I need, then you hold off. It's at your seller's, whatever your seller wants to. Oh, my seller wants to see if there's additional offers that come through Monday, so we're not signing this right now.
Yeah, and I would still, to add to that, like always over communicate. Like that's the best way, like being an agent who ignores people. So I'm so glad you brought that up. That could be very bad. So like say the deadline's coming up and they're like, are you ever going to respond? Like it would be really bad if you were ignoring them. You definitely want to communicate like, oh yes, we're super happy you know, and be super nice. Like we're really grateful you sent this offer in. We are still going to do our open house and we'll be responding Monday at 5. Like, don't just be like, oh, I don't have to respond. You definitely want to always over communicate so that they know what's actually happening. And you can be honest with them too, like, oh, we need to get a dirt invoice, we need to get a dirt estimate. We won't have it till Monday. So don't worry, if we accept your offer, we will extend it on Monday or something like that. So you can tell them what you're doing.
Totally. Okay, so we have a lot more things to go through. What do we want to do? Do we want to go through the statuses, the subject to sale, all that stuff, or should we save that for a different class? It is 5 o'clock.
Yeah. I would just say maybe touch on the statuses again, but I think you did. You really did
Yeah, a
touch on
little
the
bit.
status.
Yeah, on statuses. So we have, I just feel like the more we talk about TC status, the more we'll have to go into that side. On backup. So again, if you're representing the seller, if you put them in backup status, there's that negative, which is that it's going to start accruing days on market. So you just have to understand that if we go in backup status so that we can keep showing the property, we are going to keep accruing days on market. If they find that out later, they might be mad because they'll see it online. They'll say, okay, we went back to market. We were only on the market for 7 days. Why is it showing up as 28? And there's no button for us to be able to reset that. We can't just change it because we think it should be. So we don't have any control over days on market. So we do kind of defend those because that can make your listing look stale and, you know, old. So that is one big thing. I think for backup offers, if you're representing the buyer and let's say they don't accept, you're representing a buyer, you put in an offer on a property, they don't accept your offer, they accept someone else's. The first thing I would say is, hey, can we be in backup status? And a lot of times they'll offer it. But if they don't, say, hey, can we be in backup status? A lot of times the seller agent will say yes. Whether they mean it or not is a different thing. Because a lot of times maybe they'll say, hey, yeah, you can be in backup status if you want to. And then they never get you the paperwork for it. And so you never officially go into backup status, even try as you might.
So it's different.
It's another addendum, basically a backup addendum. And so if you want to be in backup status, you have to say, hey, can I be in backup status? Yeah, awesome. Will you counter offer me with that backup paperwork so that we can go under contract and backup status? Because as a buyer, at least in my perspective, and I'd love to hear what you think, Terry, in my opinion, buyer, it's great to be in backup status because obviously it's a house they love or they wouldn't have offered on it in the first place. They're under contract, meaning if that first contract bails, for any reason, no reason at all, whatever happens, they have to switch to your buyer. What could have happened in that process? The market could have gone up 3%. Anything could have happened, right? And they're contracted to move forward with your buyer. Now, on the flip side, if you're representing the seller, I think it's kind of a sour deal for the seller because the seller, if that first contract falls out, the seller can't market to other people, can't accept other offers, can't look around to see if there's something better. They're already contracted that they have to move to this backup offer. And let's say that buyer that was in backup position decides, nah, actually, we don't want it. Maybe the market went down or something changed in their life. They bought another house, whatever. They're like, okay, now we're in primary position, but we don't even want the house. The seller is not protected at all. The seller, the buyer just gets out of it. The seller has to go back to market. So
It's gonna go on backup, like the seller or the agent? Like
the seller, technically the seller and the seller has to say, yeah, I'll put you in backup status. And the buyer has to say, okay, yeah, I'll be in backup status. Like I say, the risk for the buyer is nothing, basically. They'll still have all their contingencies. They'll be able to bail. The risk to the seller is, let's say the market accelerates, which it does, especially around this time of year, market accelerates. And now they're like, hey, our first offer fell through. We want to go back on the market to see what this new hot market is going to give us, but they can't. They have to just go back under contract with that backup one. So the seller gets kind of pigeonholed on that contract, Whereas the buyer really isn't. The buyer at that point can take it or leave it. So I think if you're representing the buyer, it's a great deal, and do harass them.
Like I said, I had a home and they priced it like very low. At the end, the house sold for like 460. And they had like 7 offers, like 7 backup offers. And then if I was gonna be like, if I wanted to be a backup, I was gonna be the number 8.
Holy cow.
So,
But technically, and I was gonna touch on this too, so technically there can only be one backup offer. So even though there's a line of 8 people or 8
Oh.
other offers that they could be looking at, I was gonna caution you, and that's why we do these classes where we like try to focus on one side versus both sides, but so when you are representing a seller, the listing agent will say, oh yeah, no problem, I'll let you know, we'll put you here in a backup status, or you'll hear the words backup, which means they're putting your offer on their desk and they're gonna let you know if anything happens. But to technically be a backup offer, you have to have that addendum, and they're only going to pick one of those 7 offers. So if you still said, hey, I do want to be a backup offer, you would just have to be the best backup offer, and then they would accept you, which would put you like in the front of the line. So as long as you have an addendum where they put it in writing, even though you're number 8 to submit the offer, your offer could be better than the other 7, and they could bump you to the front of the line.
Oh,
So it does get confusing, and you will hear things like, oh, we'll just put you in backup. And then you're like, oh, okay, great. And you kind of sit there and you're like, am I really in backup? You don't really know. As a listing agent, I say that all the time. I'm like, great, I'll let you know if anything happens. I'll keep your offer right here, and I'll let you know if anything goes
yes, when I
wrong.
called the seller's agent, that's when they told me like, oh, there's like 7 offers, they're in backup and blah, blah, blah. So I told the buyers that, and they're like, no, we don't want to be the number 8. So
Yeah.
let's not submit an offer.
So
we
something
did-
else you could say is, so you do have a written backup offer, you have it in writing that you have a backup offer. Because then you would know, like, is there a first right of refusal in there? Do you guys even have a chance? Because if they said, oh, we have an offer under contract and we have a signed backup offer, and I was the 8th one, I probably would move on. But if they were like, no, we don't actually have it in writing as a backup offer, I might push a little harder to become a backup offer.
But what happens if you're in backup, right? For
Mhm.
this one, and then you find another? Can you go in contract with? the other,
Yes.
Even though you're still backup?
If you represent the buyer.
Right.
Yes, the buyer can back out for almost any reason. So the buyer can keep shopping, they can keep going, they can do whatever they want. But this is why, like on the seller side, we don't love the idea of a written backup offer. Because the buyer can walk away anytime, but the seller is stuck with that price.
Would that buyer
whatever.
only be protected if there was contingencies?
Yeah.
The buyer, yes, yeah, as
But
long
there
as there
would be.
wasn't. Yeah, because it even says like earnest money is not even given until they've become the primary offer. So, and then they basically would notify them, hey, you're now the primary offer, and at that point, if you guys continued moving shopping, you could say, you know what, we don't want it anymore. We're
Oh,
good.
can we do that, even though we have everything in writing?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah. So it's really good for the buyer, it's just not as good for the seller. Yeah.
Yep. So that's why a lot of times if you're representing the buyer, you put in an offer and then the seller's agent's like, oh, do you want to be in backup position? Because they're trying to be nice. They're like, oh, sorry you didn't get it, but do you want to be in backup position? You're like, yeah, totally, send it over. And then crickets,
Don't get.
absolute crickets, and you never get it. And I think it is worth it to bug them and stuff, even though it seems like kind of a moot point at that point. It's like, I try to get them to get it to you, because if you can go officially under contract, it's in your buyer's favor.
Yes.
I mean, obviously, to your point, the better would be to be accepted as primary. Of course, that's what you're going for when you put in the
But I
offer.
would also say in today's market, there's a lot of cancellations. So
Totally.
you can be the first backup. It's like, bam, you're just right under contract. If
Totally.
that person walks away, you're like moving right forward. So.
Yep. So maybe we should just touch on this really quick and then we take some questions or comments, but just at the very bottom of this, accept, counter, or reject. This is really where the seller is going to shine. So this is where the seller is going to either accept, counter, or reject their offer. So just remember, as a seller, you have whatever offers you've got. Let's say you've got multiple offers. Those aren't your only options. You've got any of those offers you can accept, Or any of those offers you could counter. So you could say, hey, I really like your price, but I don't like your dates as much. Or I don't like some of your other terms. It doesn't have enough earnest money or whatever. But you can counter offer and say, hey, we like everything about your offer except for this. Do you want to change that? So that's just when you're on the seller side, it's just important to remember there's a lot of options out there. And you can basically negotiate with the buyers to get something that works for your seller. You don't have to take the first offer that comes along. Historically, your first offer is usually your best offer, and we do say that all the time with our sellers, right? But you don't have to just take it as it is either. You can always make tweaks to it. So that's kind of, we're going to save some of this for a different time. Do you guys like this, like some of the more advanced, like real estate stuff? Yeah.
I do.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of the time we're helping you build your business because we want you to have like 1 million clients and be super busy, a lot of income coming in, and that's a huge part of it. So sometimes, at least for me, I tend to not slow down and go through the real estate of it all because I'm just like, what difference does it make unless you've got a client in your hand, right? And hopefully it's helpful. So if you like this, then we'll do some additional advanced real estate classes as well. So any comments or questions?
Anyone on Zoom?
Anything? Okay, well, so good to see you guys here. Definitely. Oh, tomorrow is that big Win with Sellers Day. Tomorrow it's at our Salt Lake office, which is the one we are in right now. So this office tomorrow, 12:30, it's the one at Brickyard, 12:30 to 4:30. So schedule it for 4 hours. I have some reason to believe it probably won't take quite that long, but really good class from an amazing listing agent, Emily Lowry, who's the GM over all 3 of the Salt Lake County offices and just an amazing listing agent. So you'll get a lot out of it. We'll see you there. I think all of us will be there tomorrow. So any comments or questions? Can't end it looking at a rep C. I feel like closing out a Zoom by looking at a rep C is it's a boring way to end a day. Okay. Appreciate you guys. Let us know how we can support you. Let's go get it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. See
Have a
ya.
good night.
You're
You
welcome.
too. See ya.
Noah, the class tomorrow is just a 1-day class, yes. So it's a big kind of focus on sellers class.